Doing today? So good to see you. Welcome, 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 welcome. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. I'm here in my lovely Brooklyn apartment, and we are ready to have yet another late night conversation. At the beginning of this week, I decided I was going to go 5 for 5. I was going to do one stream every day, either afternoon or evening, Monday through Friday this week. And we are now entering the third stream. The third stream. We're now, as of the moment this stream started, we are now 3 for 5. So, very good. You should do that more, by the way. You should do that more, by the way. I think that that's a great way to be rewarding. When you set out to do something and you do it and you force yourself to do it, you feel much more in control of your life. It is setting reasonable goals and accomplishing them is something more people should do. That's what our community is doing. We're going to do it again tomorrow, and we're going to do it again. We're going to do it again on Friday, and then we're going to be 5 for 5. This is 3 for 5. So welcome, everybody. So glad that you're here. Our community is growing. Our community is exploding. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. Hit the notifications bell. Always a pleasure to interact with all of you. Post this video wherever videos are posted. And for those of you who might be new, the way we do things here is I give my opening remarks. The whole time I write down your super chat questions with this pen. I write them down. You send the super chats. I write them with the pen. And then after that, we have the roll call. And then after that, I answer your super chat questions. And that's the show. That's how the show works. So it actually goes on as long as you want it to go on. Because as long as the super chats keep coming and I have super chats to answer, I stay on here, which could get interesting because I'm apparently going to be traveling tomorrow for work. But there you go. That's okay, right? I'm here with all of you, and I'll be back tomorrow, and we'll be back on Friday because we're going to be 5 for 5. We're going to be 5 for 5. So hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, send me a super chat if there's something you want me to discuss. If you have a question or a comment or something you want me to talk about, send me a super chat. I will give you an answer within reason, of course. I mean, like I always say, it may not be the answer that you want. Maybe a quick answer, maybe a long answer. Sometimes people give me super chats I can talk about for a half hour, and sometimes people give me super chats that I can talk about for one sentence. But that's okay. If you give me a super chat, I will give you an answer, and that's the way the game is played. That's how the cookie crumbles. I've got plenty of unnamed water beverage, and we are ready to roll. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, post the video around wherever videos are posted. And 3 parts: opening remarks, roll call, names and locations, and then from there we go and we do the super chats. I answer the super chat questions that I write down throughout the show, and that's the way the game is played. So there you go. That's how we roll, and I'm going to jump right into my opening remarks. I'm going to first start off by saying that I, up here in Brooklyn, New York, am watching very carefully the events of Occupy Congress in Washington, D.C. I am greatly inspired by Jackson Hinkle and what he is doing. I'm greatly inspired by the movement for the People's Party and the People's Party. So I think it's very exciting. Very, very exciting. And I'm paying very close attention to it. Some of my associates were there and have been sending me feedback on it. And it's very important. It's very, very important what Occupy Congress is doing. So I'm watching, and they are not alone. And they should know that they are not alone. We as a community are watching them and paying very close attention to what they're doing. And it may take a while. It may take a while. But I have a feeling something like it, if not this, something like it will be happening very soon, because there is a subterranean fire in this country. There is boiling discontent beneath the surface. The right wing certainly can't solve the problems, and the synthetic left certainly cannot solve the problems. So there's only one alternative, which is a genuine people's movement, demanding a government of action that fights for working families. And even though Occupy Congress is small, at this point, you can be sure that they are heavily influenced by the ideas that we do on these streams. I was contacted today by various people that are on the ground in DC, and they're like, people I hadn't heard from in a while. Caleb, people are talking about you at Occupy Congress. People are reflecting on your idea. And I said, oh, good to hear that. Very good to hear it. And that's important. And shout out to the good folks that are part of the Center for Political Innovation, or Students and Youth for a New America, that are in Washington, D.C. Shout out to you for all the hard work that you're doing. Shout out to Jackson Hinkle. Shout out to all the people out there in D.C. We need a government of action that will fight for working families. We absolutely need a government of action that will fight for working families. And the way to get it is for people to put their bodies on the line, put their life into the struggle. Right? I mean, the John Brown volunteers are doing it. So proud of them. Every day they are out in the streets in New York, out canvassing and spreading the revolutionary message and promoting revolutionary ideas and engaging with people. And actually on Saturday, they're going to have a speak out. All right. Okay. Private ownership. They're actually going to be having a speak out in Union Square on Saturday. Saturday, 5 p.m. in Union Square, the Center for Political Innovation will be having a little speak out in the square. I intend to be there. And there will be other folks there, the John Brown volunteers and others. So if you're in New York City and you're available on Saturday, I hope you come and join us in Union Square for a little speak out, a little public event. We'll be there to let our voices be heard and not let the pro-imperialist spin of the 20th anniversary of 9/11 go unanswered, to give an anti-imperialist, working class, populist message, an interpretation of what's going on. The John Brown volunteers have got plenty they want to say. We got folks coming down from Boston for it. We got folks from across New York City and different parts of the country. So if you're in New York City and you're available on Saturday, be there in Union Square. So there you go. Entryism, very good. Be there. Be there. And so I just wanted to make that announcement. Shout out to the John Brown volunteers if you're watching. But the next thing I wanted to talk to you all about was, I got home a little late tonight, right? Was working, had to meet with the John Brown volunteers, talk business. Got home, and waiting for me in plastic wrapping was the latest issue of Foreign Affairs magazine. Foreign Affairs magazine. And I got home and I opened it. I didn't open this, but maybe 20 minutes before I got started on here. 20 minutes. And I thought, I will find something in this magazine that'll be worth talking about before the live starts, and I was right. So let me give you a little background. Foreign Affairs magazine. This is the voice of the Council on Foreign Relations, the CFR, which is the most important think tank of U.S. foreign policy. It is it's basically the CIA's brain. That's basically what it is. It is the brain of the CIA. The way the CIA works is very, very little is actually done by the CIA itself. I tell people the CIA are like producers. They're like producers, right? If you work in TV production, as I do, you will notice that the producer does not write the script. The writer does, or the journalist does. And, you'll notice that the producer does not film it. The cameraman does. You'll notice that the producer is not on screen. The journalist or the actor or the talent is on screen. You'll notice that the producer does not broadcast it. The broadcasting company does. So what does the producer do? Well, the producer makes things happen. The producer makes sure that the writer writes it. The producer makes sure that the cameraman films it. The producer makes sure that the talent performs it. The producer makes sure that the broadcaster broadcasts it. The producer is the person who oversees it. They bring forces together. They arrange for things to happen. And, as is always pointed out, in TV production, when everything is going well, no one even notices that the producer exists. No one knows they exist because everything's going well. So no one notices the producer. However, if something goes wrong, everyone immediately blames the producer. And that is how the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency operates. If they are doing their job as effectively as they would like to, we would have no idea that they even exist. Things just kind of happen, right? News media just convinces us that U.S. foreign policy is right. CIA protests against governments the United States doesn't like that lead to violent insurgencies just kind of happen, right? People who disagree with the United States or challenge the U.S. status quo just kind of fade away and go into obscurity, and no one ever notices they exist. But when things go wrong, all of a sudden, they become apparent. When they are bad at their job, people go, the CIA really say, and people start talking about intelligence. This is the reality of how it works. And the way it works nowadays is the CIA doesn't pay for it. The Ford Foundation pays for it. The National Endowment for Democracy pays for it. Right? The Rockefeller think tanks pay for it. The CIA doesn't think of what to do. It doesn't write the script. These guys do. The Council on Foreign Relations, they write the script. The CIA doesn't do it. The Falun Gong does it. The Unification Church does it. The Albert Einstein Institute does it. The local human rights hippy-dippy protest brigade does it. And if they do it all the right way, we don't know that anything happened. But when things go terribly wrong, we all know and become aware of their presence. And this is how the world of intelligence works. And the Council on Foreign Relations, the CFR, is the brain of American intelligence. And this is the public brain of the American intelligence, right? Much of what goes on at the Council on Foreign Relations is not public, right? This is where they get all their academics, all their foreign policy scholars, all their researchers, and they compile information, and behind closed doors, they develop U.S. foreign policy. And to publicly communicate what they've come up with, they publish Foreign Affairs magazine. They have various panels where academics speak along with Joe Biden, and who pays for the Council on Foreign Relations? It's paid for by, you look at the list of their funders, every big oil company, every military contractor, that's who pays for the Council on Foreign Relations. But it actually started with the Rockefellers. It started with the Rockefeller family, right? The family that started Standard Oil, John D. Rockefeller. But even they trace it back a little bit further. So, the Rockefeller family, they're the Eastern establishment, the richest of the oil banking dynasties in the United States, the Rockefellers. They started and they were funding something that was once called the New York Council on Foreign Relations. But you can go back a little bit further than that. In fact, if you really want to find out where the Council on Foreign Relations started, it's rather ironic. It's rather ironic, given what I'm about to read to you from this magazine. But it all started with a guy named Cecil Rhodes. Do folks know the name Cecil Rhodes? Cecil Rhodes. This is Cecil Rhodes, the guy for whom the apartheid colonial state of Rhodesia was named, right? Zimbabwe, before it won its freedom and its national liberation, before the apartheid regime was overthrown, was called Rhodesia, after a British imperialist, multi-millionaire colonizer, racist named Cecil Rhodes. Also, many of you are probably familiar with something called the Rhodes Scholar Program. It's a very prestigious academic award. The Rhodes Scholarship Program. If you can become a Rhodes Scholar, that's one of the highest achievements. Well, who do you think set up the Rhodes Scholarship Program? Cecil Rhodes. And when he died, in his will, Cecil Rhodes, the colonizer of Africa, the mass murderer, he's responsible for the death of millions of Africans, brutal, racist, colonialist, an advocate of free markets, an Adam Smith libertarian free trade. In his will, Cecil Rhodes left a large amount of his money for the purpose of creating you can't make this up, for creating a, quote, secret society to promote the ideals of the British Empire, that being free trade. Now, obviously, secret society, you immediately think of decoder rings and secret passwords and the Illuminati or something. That's not what happened. His estate, in order to comply with his will, they set up something called the Round Table Group. The Round Table Group. And it was an academic, it was basically a think tank that promoted the ideology that Cecil Rhodes devoted his life to. The ideology that he devoted his life to: free markets, globalism, free trade, libertarianism. Neoliberalism, essentially, before it was neo, when it was old, classical liberalism, right? Anti-imperialist countries throw each other under bus. Wrote it down. And I got it. The Round Table Group functioned as kind of a think tank that promoted the British Empire and the British ideology of free trade, of Malthusianism, right? The idea there are too many people in the world, you need to control the population. The idea that you need more social engineering. These ideas were all basically, promoted by the Round Table Group, and eventually the Round Table Group set up shop in New York City, and it teamed up with the Rockefellers. The Rockefellers funded the Neo-Malthusian Society, and they also funded the New York Round Table Group, and eventually the New York Round Table Group became the New York Council on Foreign Relations, and now we have the Council on Foreign Relations, which is the major think tank of U.S. foreign policy. Prominent congressmen are in it. Prominent scholars are in it. Prominent folks are in it. Alan Greenspan. I don't know if people know the name Alan Greenspan. He was the chairman of the Federal Reserve for many years. In the 1980s, he was the director of the Council on Foreign Relations, and he was the protege of Ayn Rand. So Ayn Rand's best bud, best pal, Alan Greenspan, was basically overseeing the Council on Foreign Relations during the 1970s and 80s. I'm not kidding you, right? And if you want to know, you go read Ayn Rand's writings, right? This is a sociopath. This is a woman who is just absolutely satanic in every sense of the word. She did not believe in right and wrong. She talked about the virtue of selfishness. She said that compassion was a form of weakness, that altruism was the greatest form of evil, that selfishness and greed should take precedence over everything, Ayn Rand was just pure evil. Well, her personal protege, Alan Greenspan, was running the Council on Foreign Relations for many years. What's that podcast? And so, if you want to talk about evil, the Council on Foreign Relations, this is the wing of the Anglo-American establishment. It's New York, old money, New England, British Empire. This is that soft power strategic wing of American capitalism. This is that ultra rich, oil banking dynasty, CIA, geopolitical, globalist, free trade, Adam Smith, Milton Friedman. This is who these folks are. And these are the people that set up foreign policy for the United States. They think it up and the CIA does it. The CIA guys are not smart enough to think up foreign policy for themselves, right? They're a bunch of Mormons, a bunch of Boy Scouts, a bunch of military guys who just know how to follow rules. It's these people, these academics assembled and paid for and sitting down with politicians who think of all of this. And they think of what U.S. foreign policy does. Now, you'll notice the theme of their latest issue is who won the war on terror? That's the theme of their latest issue, right? And, you know, it's really great. I mean, to be able to read this publication, people should pay more attention because they speak here with a lot more honesty and candor. When Joe Biden was running for president, he wrote an op-ed for Foreign Affairs magazine, for the Council on Foreign Relations, called America Must Lead Again. And I made an entire video, you can go back and watch it now, who is behind Joe Biden, explaining in great detail, what Biden actually believed and what his critique of Trump was by reading from Foreign Affairs. And throughout the campaign, he never spoke with such honesty as he did in the pages of Foreign Affairs. So, not to advertise for them, but I want to bring your attention to page 22 of their latest issue. And again, I got home from work, from Manhattan. This was sitting there still in the plastic wrapping that it comes in. Didn't have very much time to go through it. But I thought, you know, in this little bit, I can find something to just show you how evil and satanic the ruling class of the United States is. And I was right. I was absolutely right. Page 22 of the latest issue of Foreign Affairs, we have them and us. How America lets its enemies hijack its foreign policy. Written by Ben Rhodes. Ben Rhodes. Rhodes. Does that name sound familiar? Rhodes? That's one of those old New England old money names, right? Ben Rhodes. Ben Rhodes. And who is Ben Rhodes? Now, who is the author of this article? This article called Them and Us, How America Lets Its Enemies Hijack Foreign Policy. Who is the author? Ben Rhodes is a mass murderer. Ben Rhodes has blood dripping from his mouth. Ben Rhodes, along with Samantha Power, was one of the main people who convinced Barack Obama to overthrow the Libyan government. Ben Rhodes is from a very wealthy family. I believe his cousin was his cousin or his brother or somebody was the head of NBC, MSNBC, MSDNC for a long time. He always wanted to write novels. That was his dream, was to write novels. But somehow he got into the Obama administration. And he's a hipster. He's starting to bald now, but he's got this hipster look about him. You know, he's got this hipster look about him. He wants to write novels. And Ben Rhodes, in his memoir of the Obama presidency, describes how Barack Obama did not want to intervene in Libya because he was afraid that it would turn into another Iraq or something like that. And so Ben Rhodes and Samantha Power and others found a quote from Gaddafi, where Gaddafi said, when we retake Benghazi, we're going to go house to house. Now, what that meant was they were going to track down the terrorists, the Al-Qaeda, CIA-linked people who were trying to overthrow the Libyan government. However, knowing Barack Obama's personality, knowing how to push his buttons, Ben Rhodes brags that they browbeat Barack Obama for a day or two, telling him that what Gaddafi meant when he said he was going to go house to house was he was going to kill everyone in Benghazi. He was going to go house to house. He was going to commit genocide. And they pressured Obama. And they said, Obama, if you don't bomb Libya, Gaddafi is going to kill everyone in Benghazi. And everyone's going to blame you for not stopping a genocide. And it's going to be blood on your hands, Obama. I mean, Gaddafi is going to go house to house, and he's just going to go house to house and kill every single person in Benghazi. If you don't send cruise missiles, if you don't bomb Libya, the blood is going to be on your hands. And Obama didn't fall for it at first. It took him a few days of working on Obama, pushing his buttons, pushing his emotional buttons, knowing how to work on him, that they ultimately convinced Barack Obama to destroy the most prosperous country on the African continent. Libya used to have the highest life expectancy in Africa. Now it is in shambles. People are drowning in the Mediterranean trying to get out, thanks to the efforts of Ben Rhodes. The psychological manipulation, the deception that Ben Rhodes and Samantha Power and Cass Sunstein did, their efforts to manipulate Barack Obama, effectively resulted in the deaths of millions of people. Like, there are modern-day slave markets in Libya thanks to Ben Rhodes. Ben Rhodes is an evil person, and I'm not hesitating to say that, okay? People say, Caleb, you shouldn't call people evil. You shouldn't call people satanic. I don't know how Ben Rhodes looks himself in the mirror and he says, you know what? Libya used to be a prosperous, wealthy country. It used to have the highest life expectancy on the African continent. It used to have the world's biggest irrigation system, free healthcare. And now, why, thanks to me, gee golly, Libya's a shithole. Libya's been bombed to smithereens. I've killed hundreds of millions of people. There's refugees piling into Europe. Good one on me. I feel like such a gee golly good person. Ben Rhodes is a mass murdering psychopath. He is a satanic, evil human being, if there ever was such a thing. To do what he did, to convince the first black president, the first African-American president of the United States, to destroy the most prosperous African country, to send cruise missiles to support a group of rebels that then started lynching dark-skinned Africans. Did you know that? A lot of these North Africans, the Moorish folks, they consider the dark-skinned Africans to be their inferiors, and they didn't like that Gaddafi had so many social programs. So after Ben Rhodes' cruise missiles flew, there were mass hangings and burnings of the bodies of dark-skinned Africans by the people that Ben Rhodes supported. Right? Greek Civil War, 1946. Right? That's what happened. That's what happened. Ben Rhodes is a mass murdering, evil person. And he's more dangerous. You can talk about Barack Obama, you can talk about Donald Trump and all that, but these people behind the scenes, Ben Rhodes would never win an election. No one would ever elect Ben Rhodes to office because everything about him, you can tell something's not right about him. In his communications, in his writing, he comes across as kind of a sinister mastermind, right? Right? CAI, ties to media, finance. He comes across as kind of a sinister person. The same with Samantha Power, right? And this is Ben Rhodes. This is Ben Rhodes. This is Ben Rhodes speaking in the voice of the Council on Foreign Relations. He writes an article here, and it's like the candor with which he makes his argument is unbelievable, right? I mean, the name of the article is How America Let Its Enemies Hijack Its Foreign Policy. This is basically what he's saying. In the article, Ben Rhodes says, you know what, why are we always fighting Al-Qaeda? Why are we always fighting, terrorist groups? China, they hate Al-Qaeda. Russia hates Al-Qaeda, and they've benefited from this, right? We've been focusing way too much on fighting Al-Qaeda when we should have been fighting socialism. We should have been fighting China. We should have been fighting, Bolivarian socialism in Venezuela. And we spend all this time trying to fight ISIS and trying to fight Al-Qaeda, and that's what Russia wants. That's what Russia wants. That's what China wants. Come on, guys. Why are we always trying to, keep Americans safe? Why are we always trying to, fight the people that actually kill Americans? Can we stop it already and just focus on my regime change agenda? That's basically what the article comes across as. I mean, it's really blatantly honest. He's basically saying we shouldn't fight the terrorists, and at one point, this is what he says. I'm reading to you from the article. Quote, One way to redefine the United States' purpose in the world and reshape the American identity at home would be to focus on competition with the Chinese Communist Party. The contest is one major concern in U.S. politics that evokes broad bipartisan agreement. And there are good reasons to be concerned about the Chinese Communist Party. Unlike Al Qaeda, like, who wants to fight Al Qaeda, right? I mean, who wants to fight the people that cut off people's heads in Syria? Who wants to fight ISIS? Who wants to fight, the terrorist groups that actually kill Americans and are torturing people? Like, let's instead of fighting them, unlike Al Qaeda, it has an alternative view of governance and society and the power to remake the world in such purposes. Yes, China is far more dangerous than Al Qaeda. Al Qaeda kills people and bombs people and cuts their heads off and destroys countries, but China, believes in communism. Come on, guys. What are you afraid of? Ironically, China's ascent in global influence accelerated after 9/11, as the United States was too often consumed by its focus on terrorism in the Middle East. In terms of geopolitical influence, the Chinese Communist Party has been the biggest beneficiary of the war on terror. He's basically saying here, don't fight terrorists, fight the Chinese Communist Party. Because China raising people out of poverty, China building schools and hospitals across the planet, China raising millions of people out of poverty, building the Belt and Road Initiative and joining the world together, creating an alternative form of globalization based on win-win cooperation. That Ben Rhodes considers to be far more dangerous than what his buddies in Saudi Arabia do. Far more dangerous. Far more dangerous. He's sitting here, and he's already played out this policy in Libya, destroyed Libya. He's basically arguing, instead of fighting the Chinese Communist Party, or instead of fighting Al Qaeda, we got to focus on fighting the Chinese government. Focus on fighting Russia. Focus on fighting Iran. Focus on fighting countries that are raising their people out of poverty. If you want to talk about, and he just comes out and says it. Ben Rhodes, he just comes out and says it in this article. I just read to you from it. This is unbelievable. This is who is behind the scenes. Okay? And these are very dangerous people. Very, 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 very dangerous people. Very, very dangerous people. Fight China, he says. Don't fight the terrorists. Don't worry about keeping Americans safe. Focus on overthrowing governments. All right. Libertarians and the Fed. Writing it down. And the Fed. So there you go, folks. That's how I wanted to start out. I'm sure I've got plenty more to talk about in here, but yeah, that's I'll be making my way through the latest issue of Foreign Affairs. I'll update you, right, in the breaking up of the U.S. into smaller, right. Thank you, Edward. Breaking up of USA into smaller nations, states, inevitable. I just want to let you all know about that. And this is the ruling class of the United States. They're far more threatened by China doing good things than they are threatened by Al Qaeda doing bad things. And he just basically spells that out in there. So I just wanted to just kind of share that with you all. And just let you know what is floating around out there, what our ruling class is doing. Okay. Eurasianist project to merge Russia with the Islamic world. Merge Russia with Islamic world. Dangerous. Alrighty. So on that note, folks, I think that concludes my opening remarks. Not giving a huge, long opening remarks tonight. Just wanted to do that. Why don't we do names and locations? Names and locations. I'll call you out as I see you. Names and locations. We'll do our roll call, and then from there, I will answer super chat questions until we're done. So we got Raphael in Brazil, we've got Nate in Chicago, we got Shia in Montreal, we got JT24 in Mississippi, Cleveland, Pirate Alex, Ryan out in Oakland, Enoch in Australia, Petra Muerte, Elias in Wisconsin, Temple City, California, Clyde Bank, Max the Sachs of Occupy Congress, Sam Israel. Nassau County, Char Char Darling, good friend of the program. Shout out to you. David in China. Carolyn Dario with Tamara in his heart from Brooklyn. Shout out to you guys. Great folks. Chris in the woods. Troy in Kansas City. Inside of Florida, Captain Waffles, Delta Quadrant, Nova Scotia, Mindanao, Midwest, Zach in Seattle, Austin, Texas, San Angelo Solidarity. Great people out there in San Angelo doing great work. I can't wait until the video of David from the conference we just had is up. He's a great guy. And they're doing great work out there. Christina and all of them are doing great. There's another Caleb out there, I think, in their group. Shout out to, they're doing great. Christina and David and all of them. Ramsey in Cincinnati, Mark in California, Dennis Carver in the Midwest, Auckland, New Zealand, Herb Bryant in Tampa, Florida, Natalie out in Maryland. Shout out to you, Natalie. Edward J. in LA, who is about to become a mod. Edward J. in LA is now a mod. Texas, right? New York City, West Virginia. Jenny Lynn in Cincinnati. Shout out to you, longtime friend. Sam and Radical Stan Rees from Adelaide, Australia. Shout out to you to Rees. Kieran in San Diego. Sam from Seattle, Washington, Youngstown, Ohio, Austin, Leo, and Mimi in Mexico City. Please stream every day. Well, we're trying to do 5 for 5 this week. This is the third one, so we got 2 more to do, and then we'll achieve my goal. Arthur Porter in Arizona, Phoenix, very good to talk to you, Arthur. Mosin from Iran, Ben in Denver, very good. Woodside, New York City, Javier, shout out to you. Sam in Chicago, Idaho. Marcel in Los Angeles, Detroit, Michigan. Joe Gale, shout out to you, Joe Gale, good friend out in Nassau County. Jason in Georgia, Gleb in California, Dennis, Detroit, Dana in Chicago. You just held your first discussion session of the CPI manual. People all across the country are doing that. They're reading the CPI manual. It's amazing. It's awesome. Appalachia, that's We Are City Builders, the CPI Educational Manual. Appalachia, Los Angeles, North Michigan, Montreal, Seattle. I think Dana, are you? Oh, you're already a mod. Okay, very good. Vinicius from Brazil, South Island, New Zealand, Naples, Florida, Boulder, Colorado. Dennis used to be a lurker, right? Turkey. A lot of Sams here I see. New Jersey, congrats to Dana. Olympia Logic, great friend of the show, is with us. She's from Iowa, I believe. Olympia's out there in Iowa. Shout out to you, Olympia. Shout out to you, Olympia. So glad folks are here. We're having a great time, aren't we? Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. Santa Barbara, and I somehow didn't hear you were in town, says Kevin. Well, there you go. You missed the boat, but I was there, but video will be up soon. There's been some delay in the video, unfortunately, but hopefully it comes soon because there was a great conference, great talks given all around. It was really amazing. It was really, really amazing. It was an amazing conference, just an amazing conference. So there you go. Atlanta, Georgia, Little Falls, New Jersey. Dan Keating. I think, Dan Keating, you're a good friend of the show, and you can be a mod. Dan is now a mod. All right. Tanner, Bolivar, Missouri. Very, very good. All right, folks. Like I mentioned before, if you're in New York City, Micah from Las Vegas, if you're in New York City and you want to come out and join the John Brown Volunteers, we're going to have an in-person event. John in Houston, John Whitty. We're going to have an in-person event. That'll be on Saturday in Union Square. The John Brown Volunteers are having a speak out in Union Square. Speak out in Union Square. It's going to be great. Speeches, music, Oswald Spangler. I can tell you the answer to that question, right? Glad you asked. I'll tell you all about him. Oswald Spangler. All right, wrote it down. Very good super chat. Keep the super chats rolling in, folks. That's how it works. Come join us in Union Square for a speak out for peace, jobs, democracy, and equality. One of our great gatherings of folks here in New York City. We're going to have a little speak out. We did one in Central Park a few weeks ago, about a month ago. We're going to do another one in Union Square on Saturday. We'll have the banner. We'll have our sound system. Should be fun. We'll see. It'll be small, but it'll just be kind of a speak out to promote our kind of city building socialism. So we'll see how it goes. We'll put some video up online. It'll be a good little thing. So if you're in the area, if you're in Union Square area on Saturday, that'll be great. That'll be great. We'll see how it goes, right? I mean, we do these things. I mean, the John Brown Volunteers are very dedicated. They're out there every day. I meet with these kids. We read. We have a reading session every day, and they're great folks. Just great folks. All right. So the first super chat question I got was private ownership in market socialism. What degree will it exist or not? The thing is that that should be constantly changing based on what is in line with and calculated to be in the interest of the society overall, right? And that socialist societies tend to have different forms of property. There tends to be state property and state ownership of major banks and industries. There tends to also be cooperative ownership, and there tends to also be some degree of private ownership, right? And that's generally how socialist societies work, is that there's a mixture of those. However, all of those entities are ultimately controlled by the state and by the Communist Party. The government, which is based in communities, and you have community councils and community assemblies. You have a Marxist party, a revolutionary party at the center of it. A state controls all of those things, more or less, right? Now, what's the difference? State property is government run, and the government says we need this. If it's a government run nail factory, the government says we need this many nails, and the state employees go and they make that many nails, and that's how it's done, right? Government control of banking. The government determines what lending and what credit will be assigned, and then it goes out there, right? That's state ownership. Cooperative ownership is a little bit different, right? That's where it's technically not state owned, but it's for example, in the Soviet Union, the collective farms, they were not state property. They were collective property, right? The people in the farms, they produced as many goods as much, they produced as much wheat or as much milk or as much whatever they produced, and they sold it to the government. The government set a rate, and the government would then buy the milk from the farmer and distribute it among the population, right? The government would buy the wheat, the government would buy the grain from the farmer at a set rate and then distribute it, right? And so they got paid, the cooperative gets paid for how much it produces, right? And it is, the cooperative functions on a profit basis. It's trying to maximize its own profits, right? It's trying to get as much as it can, but it's not a state-controlled entity. It simply sells its goods to the state, or in some cases, a cooperative might sell its goods directly to the public, right? And then there's private property, and private property is essentially, it's like small businesses, right? Stores, restaurants that have a private owner, an entrepreneur, or some shareholders own it, right? And those are different forms of property. And a socialist society should ultimately always be adjusting the amount of state ownership, the amount of cooperative ownership, and the amount of private ownership based on the long-term goals and the short-term interests of a socialist society. Having a planned economy gives you the ability to constantly adjust that. And some people say, well, if there's private enterprise, isn't it capitalism? No, okay? No. The difference between capitalism and socialism is, for what purpose does the means of production function? Under capitalism, the means of production function in order to make profits for those who own them. The banks, factories, and industries and centers of economic power function on the basis of making profits for owners. Socialism is the negation of that. It is when the means of production, the banks, factories, and industries, function on the basis of what is good for society, when there is a state central plan, right? When the state plans out production in the interest of society overall, when the state controls the means of production, that is socialism. However, the means of production that are ultimately subject to state control and forced to work in the overall interest of society, not based on the chaos of the market or the anarchy of production, they can be in different forms. They can sometimes be state industries that are just directly told by the government, this is what you must produce. But in some cases, they can be private industries, that are incentivized and regulated by the state, but ultimately working in their own interest, but controlled and regulated by the state and incentivized and pushed by the state to work in certain directions. Or they can be cooperatives, right, which are, sell their goods to the state or sell their goods to the general public and are, every employee is a shareholder and all of that. But ultimately, at the end of the day, the cooperative also functions within the state central plan. Right? And this is the difference between capitalism and socialism. Capitalism is the anarchy of production. It is the chaos of the market. It is the rule of the dollar. Whereas socialism is when the economy is rationally controlled and functions on the basis of social good and what's good for society. If production is carried out for the good of society, that is socialism. If production is carried out for the good of capitalists, that is capital, right? And that's the difference. And the ironic thing is a lot of people in the United States think that, socialism means getting rid of personal property. But the rate of private home ownership in most socialist societies is significantly higher than it is in the United States, right? In China, most people own their own homes. In the United States, the rate of home ownership is significantly decreasing. Most people rent their homes nowadays. Another example is that a lot of people think that in socialism you have to outlaw all small businesses and the government runs everything. Well, actually, in Vietnam and in Nicaragua and in China, socialism, public control of the means of production and planning of the economy, has actually enabled millions of people to become small business owners, right? In fact, the micro entrepreneurship program is one of the most successful things that the Nicaraguan socialist government, led by the Sandinistas, has done. I've been to Venezuela, and I've seen how the Venezuelan government subsidizes all kinds of small private owners. They get subsidized by the government. And in Vietnam, a lot of people are self-employed. There are cooperative businesses, and in China, there's a whole lot of businesses, tech companies that are started up. The difference is that in the United States and in capitalist countries, the corporations are in control, and production is carried out simply for their profits. In China, and in Vietnam, and in Nicaragua, and in Cuba, and in Venezuela, the corporations that exist, be they public corporations, private or cooperative corporations, they all are controlled by the state. There is state central planning. And for those who repeat this common claim that is made by libertarians, the economic calculation problem, they say, oh, the government couldn't possibly plan the economy, it's too complicated. Malarkey. Amazon, a global corporation, plans its activities. Amazon is bigger, far bigger than most countries, and it very effectively plans its activities. It just plans them in order to make profits for Jeff Bezos and the shareholders. Walmart, a huge corporation, right? Appalachia, a nation, right? Walmart, huge corporation, all over the world, millions of employees. They plan out production and they plan out their activities. They just do it. They plan according to making profits for the Walton family, right? That's what they do. They plan out production in order to make profits for their shareholders. Well, socialism is central planning, like they do at Amazon, like they do at Walmart, except it's not for the benefit of shareholders. It's for the benefit of the population, right? And the fact that capitalist planning can take place at such a macro level shows that it is possible, especially with computers nowadays. It is very, very possible to have central planning of economic activity, but the purpose is why, right? Are you simply having central planning within a corporation to make profits for the shareholders, or are you having this, the state plan out production for the benefit of the whole country? That's the difference. So private ownership in socialism will fluctuate, and they, in the Soviet Union, they had a huge amount of private ownership in the 1920s. They had the new economic policy. And then they adopted socialism in one country in the 5-year economic plans of Stalin. And then in the 1980s, they reintroduced market mechanisms, and then the Soviet Union fell. In China, in the 1950s, China argued it was not a socialist society. It was not wealthy enough to be socialist. It was too poor. So they had the period of new democracy, or the new democratic revolution, where they redistributed land to the peasants. They built some state-run factories, and there were some private factories. There were many millionaires in China during the 1950s. They had the new democratic period. But then during the 1960s, after the Great Leap Forward and the Cultural Revolution, China moved toward having a fully state-run economy. During the Cultural Revolution, they started having a fully state-run economy. They started trying to, and they basically transitioned to more or less the Soviet model of having a fully state-run economy. However, if you read Mao's critique of the Soviet economy, etc., then they started arguing that was too centralized, it wasn't democratic enough. So, you started during the Cultural Revolution. There were, attempts at factory autonomy, in Shanghai. 1967, you had the January storm in Shanghai, where the Cultural Revolution, Shanghai declared itself a commune, and every factory was autonomous, selling its goods to the state. Right? Okay. Subsidized by the government in different ways. All right. Okay. All right. So ecofascism, and right, corporations subsidized by government, and you started to have, they started to break up the central planning and move almost towards something similar to what Yugoslavia was doing during the Cultural Revolution. Mao slowed some of that down and introduced the 3-in-1 combination. And then in the 80s, you had the reform and opening up, where they started to have free enterprise zones and model cities. And now we see Xi Jinping moving toward more state control and, forcing corporations to invest in public good and things like that. So, the Chinese are constantly adjusting their model. Cuba is constantly adjusting its political and economic model. And that socialist countries should be doing that. The idea that there's one pure way to have a socialist economy, I would argue, is false. That socialism is constantly evolving and adapting. The way the Paris Commune did things was not the way the Bolsheviks did things. The way Mao did things is not the way Stalin did things. The way Fidel Castro did things is not the way Mao and Stalin did things. The way Hugo Chavez and the Bolivarians and the Sandinistas are doing things nowadays is not the way that Fidel Castro and Ho Chi Minh did things. And that there's constantly an evolution. Socialism is constantly changing, just like every other thing in the universe, right? We talk about A does not equal A. Socialism is like that. And to think that there will be one model of socialism that is the pure model and that all others are therefore fake socialism and revisionist and state capitalist is not correct, right? Now, we can criticize problems in socialist societies. We can talk about what contributed to the fall of the Soviet Union, the fall of the Eastern Bloc. We can talk about the weaknesses that some socialist countries have. That's totally fair. I mean, Venezuela, for example, one of the biggest weaknesses of their socialist system is the dependence on oil. That oil is such a big part of their socialist system that when the oil prices significantly dropped, state revenue significantly dropped, and that weakened their economy. They import their food significantly. They don't have very much state-run manufacturing and such, and so Venezuela was very, very badly hurt by the oil price drop. Whereas in Bolivia, their transition towards socialism, they are not as dependent on oil, so they weren't as badly damaged by the oil price drop. And that petro-socialism model, that a lot of the Ba'ath countries like Iraq and adopted, what Gaddafi adopted in Libya, and what Venezuela has adopted. There's a weakness with petro-socialism, which is when you have the export of a single commodity being the main subsidizer of state central planning. That's a weakness of a socialist society that makes a socialist society very vulnerable. There's ways to criticize the different models of socialism. And petro-socialism, look, what is petro-socialism? Right? Petro-socialism itself is a model that didn't really emerge until at least the late 1960s. Until the OPEC boycott, until the Ba'ath countries started moving towards socialism, until Gaddafi was doing his thing in Libya, no one had even thought of petro-socialism, right? And now, Venezuela's very much doing the petro-socialism thing. And now we see one of the weaknesses of petro-socialism. So socialism is always changing. Socialism is not stagnant. And it's a mistake to fall into the mindset that socialism is always going to be the same. There's one way of doing socialism. Don't do that. Socialism is always changing. Capitalism is different in many places too. Some societies like Saudi Arabia and Singapore have a very high rate of state management of capitalism. It's still capitalism because it's an economy based on profits. The state simply manages profits going into the hands of the owners and of the private capitalists at the top of the economy. But there's a huge amount of state ownership and state management of capitalism. Whereas, in some societies like the United States, you have a very libertarian free market model of capitalism, right? In Norway and Sweden, you have a very big welfare state. There's different models of capitalism and there's different models of socialism. And we need to get past this idea of of not understanding this, right? This idea that if it's not my pure model of socialism, it's not really socialism. That's a mistake. That's idealism, right? There are many different forms of socialism in the world today, right? And there's going to be many different forms of, and there's already many different forms of capitalism, and we need to understand that. And we need to get away from idealism. Ideas do not define reality. They don't, right? And that is one of the basic tenets of Marxism, is that the material conditions define ideas, right? The base, the superstructure flows from the base, right? The reason that the ideology of the United States is, free competition, libertarian, is because the economic base, because that serves the system that exists. We have a capitalist system, right? And a socialist society will have, will have different ideologies espousing it, right? That the economic foundations are what define whether it's capitalism or socialism, not the ideas that people espouse. So there you go. All right. The next question comes from Chaya, and she's asking about entryism. So what is entryism? Well, entryism, it's important to talk about what it is and then what I think of it. Well, first we have to define what it is. Entryism is the idea of revolutionaries joining non-revolutionary organizations in order to try and influence them. I guess that's what you can call it. I mean, generally the term entryism refers to something more specific. It refers to when Trotskyites join social democratic groups. And I think they called it the French turn, right? In France, the Trotskyites, they were kicked out of the Communist Party. And so they said, all right, well, the Social Democratic Party of France, they allow anybody to join. So the Trots all joined the Social Democratic Party of France. In the United States, the Trotskyites were kicked out of the Communist Party, so they joined the Socialist Party. They were a faction within the Socialist Party. And it generally refers to Marxist-Leninists or a Leninist Marxist cadre organization making a tactical decision to join a broader social democratic organization. The idea of revolutionaries joining non-revolutionary organizations, that happens all the time, right? I mean, the labor movement, for example, often revolutionary Marxists will join reformist labor unions that support the Democrats and stuff, right? Often, communists who want free health care will join organizations that are fighting for national health care that are not led by communists, right? This is just the United Front. This is mass organizing. But entryism refers specifically to Marxist-Leninists or Trotskyites joining social democratic organizations. And that's what it refers to. And actually, Trotsky, this was a lifelong obsession of Trotsky's. When Lenin pitched the idea of forming the Bolsheviks as a party of a new type, Trotsky rejected it. Right? The people in the room, who took the vote, the people who went along with Lenin, they became the Bolsheviks, and the people in the room who went against it, they were called the Mensheviks. Trotsky was originally a Menshevik. And he argued that instead of forming the Bolsheviks, he was just going to be an entryist into the Mensheviks. He was going to form the August Bloc, which would be the more radical faction of the Menshevik Party, of the reformist Menshevik Party. And that was Trotsky. And later, after Trotsky was kicked out of the Communist International, kicked out of the Soviet Union, that's what his followers did. They went into the Socialist Party. They went into the Labor Party in the United Kingdom. They have the Militant Tendency, which was a Trotskyite entryist faction, and I believe Socialist Appeal. And they've kicked out a lot of the groups that were supporting Jeremy Corbyn. They were entryists. They were like Trotskyites who joined the Labor Party to try and push for more radical politics from within. There's nothing inherently wrong with that. I mean, I'm not a Trotskyite, and I think that Trotsky's obsession with it and the fact that Trotskyites do it often points to the fact that when it really gets down to it, Trotskyites are really more in line with social democracy than they are with Leninism. Their theory of permanent revolution negates the idea that you can have socialism in the developing world. They very much are obsessed with the West. The theory, the Western chauvinism of Trotskyism Trying to hold on to Marx and not not do the leap that Lenin made, that makes sense. That said, there could be times where communists might tactically join the Labor Party, might tactically join the Democratic Socialists of America. Um, all right, well, all right, CPIM, Modi, Kerala, communists in India. So there you go. So, but as far as what do I think of it? Let me add another thing. There's another thing it's worth mentioning called deep entryism. So that's entryism. Entryism is usually done very publicly. Some Trotskyist group will announce, all of us are going to join the Socialist Party. All of us are going to join the Labor Party, right? But there's another kind of entryism, and this is called deep entryism. And this was when Michel Pablo, he was a leader of Trotskyism in Greece, I believe, the leader of the Greek Trotskyites. He announced that because of the Cold War, the Soviet Union was becoming, de-Stalinized, right? It was being regenerated. He argued that because the Soviet Union was being attacked by the United States, because of the Cold War, the Soviet Union was becoming more in line with what Trotskyites believed. And when Khrushchev gave the secret speech, he said, "Aha! See, now even Khrushchev's even bashing Stalin." So, so join the existing communist parties. But of course, the communist parties had a ban on Trotskyites. Trotskyites were not allowed to join the existing communist parties. They weren't allowed to do it. They were not allowed to join the existing communist parties because they had a ban on Trotskyites. So they had to do it secretly. They had to secretly join the existing communist parties, and this was called deep entryism because they couldn't publicly announce, hey, we're Trotskyites, we're going to join the existing communist parties. They wouldn't do that. The communist parties wouldn't allow them. So they engaged in what was called deep entryism. Deep entryism, which was they would join the party and they functioned secretly, right? And they joined the Greek Communist Party and functioned as a secret faction. They got kicked out. They joined in the United States. I think there's been various Trotskyite groups that have attempted to join CPUSA and been kicked out. This happens, right? Deep entryism, it's called. And one thing I've noticed is that communists tend to be very paranoid about deep entryism. It's really kind of sad. It's very, very sad. I mean, I've encountered that recently. I don't want to give into details, but there's a lot of, and even when I was in the Workers' World Party, I found out there was a group of people in in some area, I think it was like Connecticut or something. It was a group of like 10, 20 people who'd wanted to join the Workers' World Party in the 90s. And Sam Marcy and Fred Goldstein wouldn't let them because they're like, they might form a faction when they join. They're going to practice deep entryism, and it's like, and there's a lot of that goes on, right? And that it's kind of a paranoid thing, right? There are probably, trots out there that are still doing this, trots that have joined the Communist Party of some country and function as a secret underground Trotskyite faction. That probably happens still, but, the amount of paranoia that leftist groups have about deep entryism is really kind of sad. It's just... I don't know. It's just, it's like and then again, it kind of gets down to the corruption of democratic centralism that a lot of Marxist groups in the United States practice, which is that they have it in their minds that they have this very, very, very specific interpretation. Popular Front of all leftist parties possible, right? PF of all leftists possible. And it's just kind of sad. But what it really gets down to is it's like, they think that, these communist parties, they want you to agree with everything They want you to agree exactly with them, exactly with their interpretation of every event. With, I mean, if you don't agree with them about what happened in Czechoslovakia in 1968, well, then you can't be in the group. I mean, they want total ideological conformity on every issue, and that's just not realistic. I mean, two people are not going to agree on absolutely everything. And so there's this fear that somebody else might come in and think something different than what the great leader thinks, and it's sad. I mean, this is the state of affairs. I mean, this is what happens when leftist groups are isolated from society. They become very competitive. They live in their own little world and they fight with each other. And this is why I say out of the movement to the masses, right? Because it's not realistic. You can't realistically expect, you know, expect you know that that everyone's going to accept the line, on everything. You take like the Green Party, for example, right? If there were like 25, take, I don't know what state you all are in. You're all in different states, but say you have the Green Party of Kansas. You're the Green Party, right? You're just this third party that, in Kansas there's probably 10, 12 people in Kansas who are Green Party people, right? Well, imagine that the head of the Green Party of Kansas got a phone call. There's some, thank you for the super chat. There's some kid, he's like, hey, I'm in college. I'm in college, and me and 20 of my friends, we want to support the Green Party. What would the Green Party say? They'd be like, awesome, great, join, right? Unfortunately, communist groups in the United States, someone called up and they said, hey, are you, the Marxist, Leninist, Revolutionary Party, well, I'm a communist. I live in Idaho, and I've got 10, 20 of my friends who want to join your group. Can we join your group? Right? Their response is going to be, why? Why do you want to join our group? And they'll be like, because we agree with you. And they'll be like, okay, but we're going to check you out. And they are going to be, and if that group has done its own reading, and if that group has studied Marx on its own, if that group has been reading books from other parties, they're going to get, oh, no, we only read books printed by our group. And it's like, these groups are delusional. That's why they're out of touch. And it's like this fear of deep entryism, this fear that somebody might join who's actually working for another group, and it's all part of a big, it's part of the paranoia that has really overtaken leftist groups. It's really kind of sad. But anyway, that wasn't the question, right? And we're only on super chat number 2, and we're got to keep going. So but what do I think of entryism? Again, as a concept, I'm not opposed to it, right? I think deep entryism is very stupid, right? It's really a waste of time, right? Deep entryism, like secretly joining another group so you can manipulate it from within, is like the stupidest thing you could ever do. So I'm against deep entryism. Regular entryism, would there be a situation where a group of serious Marxists might join the Green Party, the Socialist Party, the DSA? Sure, there might be a time where that's a good thing to do. I don't think that that's the best. I am dedicated to a political education project. I'm not joining any group. I'm engaging in education right now. The Center for Political Innovation. All right, you can be a mod, Lily. We are an educational think tank. We are engaging in education. We are trying to teach people about Marxism. Publish books out of the movement to the masses. It's a mass education project. We're not involved in activism at this time. We're not organizing protests. We're not, we are engaged in education. In education, that's what we're doing. If you want to take our education and do something with it, if you want to, take what you learned from the Center for Political Innovation and apply it in your group, in your Marxist party, or in your activism, good for you, right? That's fine. I just, that's, I'm not interested in engaging in entryism or engaging in party politics. Seriously, I have tried my hardest to stay away from all that drama, right? I am involved in trying to educate people about Marxism, trying to get people to understand Marxist theories. That's what I'm interested in doing. Yeah, so there you go. I mean, I'm not, but entryism, it's a thing, right? So the next super chat that we have is, the person asked, what about Chimerica? Can China do without America? Yeah, absolutely, China can. China's got some of the biggest corporations in the world. I think I saw your email. Yeah. China's got some of the biggest corporations in the world. They're selling products all over the world. They've got a vibrant economy. Yes, China can do without America. The USA is very much, I mean, it's basically boycotting China at this point. I mean, it's getting more stringent, the sanctions and all that. But yes, China can survive without America. Very much. Very, very much. No question about it. All right. Why do anti imperialist countries throw each other under the bus? Well, you have to remember these countries have different interests. Okay, and and this person is basically asking like, why have I seen pieces on CGTN that are critical of this country, or, I mean, I don't speak for CGTN. Obviously, I've never worked there. I have no relationship with them really. But as far as why is it that anti-imperialist countries don't always see eye to eye? Well, you have to remember. Well, first of all, there are some big differences. I mean, one big difference: North Korea is an anti-imperialist country. North Korea has proliferated nuclear weapons, right? And it has left the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Lately, it starts that way in the Greens, but once you start to disagree, the leaders at various levels. All right, all right, all right. All right, Green Party. Um, North Korea has withdrawn from the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, and they've proliferated nuclear weapons. Now, defenders of North Korea will say, look, you're allowed to leave the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, so what's the deal? Well, Russia and China are also anti-imperialist countries, but Russia and China are very committed to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty because the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty prevents other countries from developing nuclear weapons, right? The Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty basically says if you have nukes now, you can keep them, and everyone else sign this and say you don't get nukes, right? And that's very important because if you don't do that, then pretty soon the United States starts giving nukes to all of its allies. And then Russia and China are then forced to give nukes to all of their allies. And pretty soon we got nuclear weapons all over the world. And that's a really dangerous situation. And so the United States and the Soviet Union and China have sat down and they've said, all right, you know what? Because we all have nukes, we're not going to give up our nukes, but we're going to make an agreement called the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty that basically we will encourage our aligned countries not to get nuclear weapons, right? Now, Israel has not signed the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Israel won't admit it has nuclear weapons. Everyone knows they do. But other than that, most countries have signed the Non-Proliferation Treaty. North Korea was in a situation in the 1990s where they felt they needed to withdraw from the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, and at that point, proliferate nuclear weapons. Now, Russia and China obviously can't support that and obviously have to put sanctions on North Korea. Because if they don't, then the United States can say, oh, okay, I guess, Russia and China are going to go along with North Korea getting nuclear weapons. I guess then we can give nuclear weapons to South Korea. What? I mean, in order to stop things from escalating, they have to keep the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty intact. So Russia and China have had to punish North Korea for getting nuclear weapons, right? And this makes sense, right? If you are Russia and you are China and you don't want, if you don't want the Nuclear Proliferation Treaty to come unraveled, right? You have to say to North Korea, okay, well, you have to, take action and somehow penalize North Korea for getting nuclear weapons, right? And that there are situations like this all over the world. So yeah, I mean that whereas North Korea feels like they have no choice, they have to get nuclear weapons. Russia and China that are thinking about global issues say we need to keep the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty intact. And that's an example of what this person asked about anti-imperialist countries, quote unquote, throwing each other under the bus. That's an example of that. That's very much an example of that. But, you can talk about during the Cold War. I mean, the USA worked really, really hard to manipulate Russia and China against each other. During the 1960s, the USA was much friendlier to the Soviet Union, portrayed Russia, they at least wanted peace, and it was China were the crazy, global anti-imperialists. Then when the 70s came along, suddenly China became the good ones. The Soviets were the evil Stalinists in China. They were communists, but they were rational. They were good people. Nixon could go there. They had market reforms, blah, blah, blah. And that the USA would like to, and that's one thing the imperialists will do is they will play favorites. They will play favorites, right? They will pick out some anti-imperialist countries and be friendlier to them. And some anti-imperialist countries, they will just isolate them, and that this is a game that they play. Zbigniew Brzezinski, one of his strategies was to separate the satellite countries from the Soviet Union, right? I mean, the Soviet Union was a major country that was anti-imperialist, but there were a number of countries throughout Eastern Europe and around the world that were considered by Brzezinski and the geopolitical strategists of U.S. imperialism to be satellite countries. And under the Carter administration, there was a big effort of the USA to get closer to the satellite countries. For example, I've talked about this before. Jimmy Carter sent his brother to go have drinking parties with Gaddafi, right? Billy Carter, Jimmy Carter's younger brother, became friends with Gaddafi and went over to Libya and had drinking parties. Billy Carter had drinking parties with Gaddafi, and eventually became a registered foreign agent of the Libyan government. And he had his own brand of beer. He called it Billy Beer. And Billy Carter, who was not the world's most intelligent person, became Gaddafi's drinking buddy. And of course, that made Libya feel like it was much better with the United States. And during that period, Libya, its position on Afghanistan was to align with the United States. Libya supported the United States against the Soviet Union in Afghanistan. And Libya halted during the Carter years a lot of its support for anti-imperialist movements around the world. I mean, it slowed down its support for the IRA, it slowed down its support for the Black Panthers and other groups because the United States was being friendly to them. And the president's brother was going over there and drinking it up with Gaddafi, right? And by the USA, being nice to Libya and giving Libya some special treatment, Libya, an anti-imperialist state, backed away from some of its support and actually, supported Osama bin Laden and the Mujahideen in Afghanistan. And that was a way they could manipulate Libya, what they considered to be a Soviet satellite country, against the Soviet Union. Carter tried to do this with Cuba, but it wasn't as successful because, there's a huge Miami right wing in the United States. The Cubans are, so close. But, there were the boat lifts. There was the Moncada boat lifts, I believe. And there was there was also a situation where he kind of lifted some of the restrictions, and Jimmy Carter tried to be friendlier to Cuba on the understanding that getting friendlier to Cuba could create distance between Cuba and the Soviet Union. And that was a strategy. And this is this is a way the imperialists will operate, right? Is that they will pick a couple anti-imperialist states, give them special treatment in order to pull them away from the other anti-imperialist states. It's just, you can see that in a workplace, right? In a workplace, how many people have often thought, where like the workers are together, they're mad about something that's going on, in the factory, they're together, but then the boss picks one of the workers and treats him better than the others, and suddenly he starts to think, well, maybe my interest isn't with these other guys. I'm special. The boss is being nice to me, right? And this is a game the United States plays. The most recent example of that is Belarus. Right? Belarus, which is a socialist country, an anti-imperialist socialist country led by Lukashenko. You'll notice that in the lead up to their election, the United States started sucking up to Belarus. And the United States had some trade deals with Belarus, and there were some positive press articles about Lukashenko. And so suddenly, Lukashenko was like talking smack against Putin. And Lukashenko was talking smack against Putin and against Russia. And Belarus, was getting that, special treatment and was kind of throwing Russia under the bus and all of that. And then what happened? They had their election. And as a result of that, the USA unleashed chaos and instability in Belarus. And so now Belarus they're sitting down with Russia and they're saying, Russia, don't let them do to us what they did to Libya, what they did to Ukraine. And so because of that, Belarus has now gotten much closer to Russia. But, what's interesting, 35% of U.S. dollars were printed last year, right? All right. Right. U.S. dollar printing inflation. All right. So pretty much, what often happens, you'll notice, is the USA gets friendly. It gets friendly to an anti-imperialist state, not because it's trying to give them special treatment, but because it's actually planning, it's getting closer to them, it's hugging them so it can stick a knife in their back. And that's actually what the United States tends to do. For example, Libya was getting closer to the United States at the time that that the USA ultimately overthrew it. When the United States gets close to these countries, it can slip its agents in there. It can slip the National Endowment for Democracy in there. It can study and find out what divisions in the country to manipulate. And Gaddafi called Obama his little African son. BP had a big oil deal. Obama arranged for the guy they accused of being the Lockerbie bomber to be sent back to Libya. And Libya started dissing Cuba and or dissing China, dissing Russia, and all that. And Libya was pretty isolated because it thought it was in with the United States. And then the United States, it got them close enough it could sink the knife into their back. And there's many examples of that, like Belarus. Again, Belarus got close to the United States, and it was dissing Russia. And then look what happened, right? The United States then staged an attempted color revolution against Lukashenko. The Soviet Union. At the time of the fall of the Soviet Union, U.S. media was the U.S. was more pro-Soviet during the Gorbachev years than ever before. There were joint TV specials, and it's funny. I watched some old clips of Rush Limbaugh, and he was on there, and he was like, liberals love Gorbachev. They love Gorbachev. He's a dictator. He's just a communist dictator. There's nothing special about Gorbachev, but all the liberals, they love Gorbachev. Well, there's a reason that they loved Gorbachev. It's because they knew that Gorbachev would set the stage. The USA was getting close to the Soviet Union. Cultural exchanges. Bernie Sanders was going over there. Joint rallies against nuclear weapons and, days of action against nuclear weapons and nuclear power. In the late 80s, the United States and the Soviet Union were getting closer than ever, but that was just so the United States could sink the knife into their back, right? And this is a game the United States plays, and it's like the USA is not a really good friend to make, because if you're an anti-imperialist state, the United States will get friendly to you so it can overthrow you, right? And it's weird because you have to think there's got to be some of these people at foreign affairs have got to be sitting there going, can we not do this? Because people catch on to the pattern. I'm just a guy sitting in my Brooklyn apartment, okay? I'm just a dude, and I can catch on to this, that Belarus, they were given favored treatment to Belarus. Oh, then they tried to overthrow it. Oh, they were given favored treatment to Gaddafi. Oh, and they overthrew Libya. They were being really nice to the Soviet Union in the late 80s, and oh, they overthrew it. It's like, if I can figure this out, okay, you can bet that these anti-imperialist states, that they can figure this out, right? They got whole intelligence agencies and geopolitical think tanks and all. They can figure this out. If I can, they can, okay? And so there's got to be people sitting there in the think tanks going, other people can figure this out, and no country's going to want to become friendly with us because they're going to see this pattern. And part of the reason they want to be friendly to some anti-imperialist states is not just to overthrow them. It's because they also want to manipulate them against other anti-imperialist states. They want to set up apparatus they want to get intelligence from those socialist, anti-imperialist states about other anti-imperialist states, right? It's like there's all kinds of reasons they do it, but it appears that it's like, it's like they're just so tempted, right? Once they get into an anti-imperialist state, once they're able to get some of their people there, and once they're able to sink some U.S. businesses there, they just can't bring themselves to not overthrow it. They're so addicted to war and regime change that they can't even strategically manipulate anti-imperialist states against each other. So there you go. I hope that was a long answer, but I hope it gave you some insights. It was an interesting question. I have not listened to What's Left podcast. I just haven't listened to it. I have not listened to What's Left podcast. The answer to your question is no, I have not. But if maybe I should. Should I? Or is it worth it? Is it worth listening to? China fentanyl narrative. All right. China fentanyl narrative. All right. Alrighty. Okay. All right. The Greek Civil War in 1946. Well, there was the Greek king, who was a monarch, and the USA sought to reimpose him on Greece against the coalition that came out of the defeat of the fascists, right? So you had the king of Greece, And then, as you know, the Nazis had occupied Greece, the king had been overthrown. There had been a government created that was the communists were a big part of. That and then you had the Greek king, and the United States backed the Greek king against the anti-fascist coalition government that came out of World War II. That's what that was about, because the coalition government that emerged after the defeat of Nazis in Greece, because that government had a lot of communists in it, the USA tried to restore the king of Greece. That's what that was about, 1946. Um, a lot of people criticize the Soviet Union. They say the Soviet Union should have done more to support Greece during that. Well, the USA had the atomic bomb. The Soviets did not, right? And the Soviet Union was surrounded and barricaded. And the Soviet Union, maybe they could have done more, but would it have resulted in World War III? I mean, the Soviet Union didn't have the upper hand at that point. I mean, after World War II, there were many places. France, for example, the communists in France were wildly popular, but they were forced to step down out of the government in order to get Marshall Plan aid. And yes, the communists in France probably could have seized power in France, but that would have led to a new war. And the Soviet Union was not prepared to have a new war in France. And so the Communist Party of France, while they could have probably, they probably had enough support among the population to take power, they didn't have the military support, right? The United States was not going to let France become a full-on socialist country. Right? You know about Operation Gladio that happened, where the United States basically rigged the elections of Italy to prevent the communists of Italy from winning the elections in the aftermath of World War II. All over Europe, especially on the European mainland, especially on the European mainland, all over Europe, after the Nazis were defeated, the communists were very, very popular because everybody knew the communists had been the main force of resistance to the Nazis. Everywhere, the communists had formed underground resistance cells, the communists had fought the Nazis, the communists had done heroic, amazing things to defeat the Nazis. So, because the communists were known to be such effective anti fascist fighters, membership in communist parties in Italy and in France and in West Germany and in Austria and places like that, it surged. The membership massively surged because the communists were very, very much, considered to be the heroes of the war. Right? This is what all these folks don't understand, right? A lot of people who don't understand world history, they just can't wrap their minds around how admired the communists of the world were coming out of World War II because of what they had done to defeat fascism, right? There you go. Why do libertarians want to end the Federal Reserve? Well, they view the Federal Reserve as being a central bank. I mean, which you could argue that it is. It's just not a. It's not. It's a capitalist bank. I mean, it's a for-profit private institution that is propped up by the government to try and stabilize the economy. It was the Morgans. I read Henry Morgan, who was one of the wealthiest Wall Street bankers. After they continued to have Wall Street panics and crashes, Henry Morgan got together a number of his, of his Wall Street friends, and they got together at a place called Jekyll Island, and they said we need to have a central bank that will pump credit in and out of the economy so we don't keep having economic crises every few years. And so they came up with it, and then they went to the U.S. government, and they created, with Congress, they created the Federal Reserve Bank. It's a private bank. And I've often joked that libertarians should love the Federal Reserve, right? The printing of money is done by the government. The U.S. Constitution says that only the government can print money, but yet we've even privatized that. Look, even the government doesn't even print the money anymore, right? Next we won't have a post office. If you think about libertarian ideology, they want private companies to do everything. They should be happy that a private corporation prints our money. We don't have big government printing our money anymore. It's kind of funny, but no, the reason that the libertarian movement opposes the Federal Reserve is because the Federal Reserve is a mechanism by big capital to stabilize the capitalist economy, and they don't like that. And they realize that it serves big capital. Libertarianism tends to represent the interests of lower level capitalists. It tends to be lower level capitalists who resent government involvement in the economy because they're not part of the club, right? Government intervention in the economy tends to favor the bigger corporations who buy the politicians. So they resent it, and they want to, minimize government involvement in the economy. They want a level playing field or whatever, so that they can just compete. And they don't like that the big capitalists, the huge monopolies, the Eastern establishment, the big oil companies, etc. They don't like that they, when the government gets involved, those guys win, and they're convinced that if it was a real free market, that they would have a fair chance to compete with the big level capitalists. So yeah, the Federal Reserve You look at the board of the Federal Reserve and all that. It's big money. It's big banks. It's big corporations, right? That's who it is. So if you're a little corporation, a little, if you're a fracking company, it's competing with big oil. If you're a hotel chain, it's competing with, one of the big hotel chains. If you're a low-level capitalist, you're going to hate the Federal Reserve because you don't control it. And that's really what it gets down to. Libertarianism tends to represent the interests of lower-level capitalists, the millionaires who are competing with the billionaires, right? The low-level billionaires that are competing with the ultra-rich oil banking dynasties. They're not part of the club, and they're never going to be part of the club, right? And they resent the club. They don't want the club to exist. And this is that book that I've often referenced, The Yankee and Cowboy War by Carl Oglesby. Very good book. You can read The Anglo-American Establishment by Carol Quigley. And a lot of libertarians, I will give them credit, despite the fact that they don't understand capitalism and Marxism, they do understand who's who among the U.S. ruling class. That they understand. That they understand very, very well. They understand that there is a clique, the Eastern establishment. There is the ultra rich versus the other rich, and they understand that, right? And they have that kind of, they know different forces within the power structure a little bit better than leftists do. A lot of leftists, they see the power structure in a very dogmatic, doctrinaire way. Well, there's the capitalists and the workers and all that, but in terms of who's who among the ruling class, who the rich people are and what their interests are, and I just talked about Ben Rhodes and Samantha Power and the fracking companies versus the big four supermajors. They can't talk about that. Libertarians can talk about that generally, but the lower level folks, or the leftists often can't talk about that with any depth. So there you go. All right, next question. Is the breaking up of the USA into smaller nation states inevitable? I would argue no, that it's not inevitable. As far as when you say nation states, I mean, if you're referring to, a black nation, a Chicano nation, the indigenous territories, perhaps Appalachia, that would have to depend on the people there wanting that and being able to fight for it. And right now, I don't think the majority of African Americans want a separate black republic. I don't think the majority of Appalachians want a separate Appalachian republic. And they don't want it and they're not willing to fight for it, number one. As far as regionalism, I mean, I feel like we will tend, as the economy gets worse, there will be more different interests pulling on it, but I wouldn't say it's inevitable. I would not say the United States breaking apart is inevitable. I think we may start to move in that direction as capitalism declines. No question about it. I think we will start to move in that direction as the capitalist system declines. Excuse me. But I don't think it's inevitable at all. And I think if there could be a strong city building anti-imperialist socialist movement, that could potentially hold the country together. So there you go. Is the Eurasian plan to merge Russia with the Islamic world dangerous? I is what the Eurasian plan to merge Russia with the Islamic world? Yeah, that's not happening, my friend. That's not happening, right? In Russia, they are Russian Orthodox. They are not Muslims. There's a lot of tension between Christians and Muslims in Russia. The idea that Russia would merge with Saudi Arabia and Turkey, and yeah, that's never going to happen, my friend. I don't know. You're talking about this plan. I don't know what this plan is you're talking about. Will Russia have better relations with those countries? Sure. Do they have common interests? I mean, Russia does a lot of business with Iran, which is a Muslim country. Russia and OPEC, and they negotiate with Muslim countries a lot. But the idea that Russia would merge with the Islamic world, that's not going to happen. That is not going to happen. Now, it's important to note that Russia does have the most Muslims of any non-Muslim country, which is interesting, right? Of all the non-Muslim countries in the world, Russia has the most Muslims. And, there are a lot of Muslims in Russia. There's Chechnya, etc. But, yeah, Russia merging with the Islamic world, no, that's not going to happen. That is not going to happen. There are regions in Russia that are heavily Islamic, like Chechnya and such. But the idea that Russia would merge with the Islamic world, no, that's not going to happen. All right, Oswald Spengler. Who is Oswald Spengler? Oswald Spengler was a German conservative. He was a right-winger in Germany, a right-wing theoretician who was an inspiration to the Nazis. But he had big disagreements with the Nazis on a number of points. And he actually, when the Nazis took power, he assumed they would make him like a big important person, and he was quite angry because they didn't. Oswald Spengler, he wrote The Decline of the West, which is a book that basically argues that civilizations and empires go through three stages. They go from like the period when they're rising to the period of corruption, I think, and then the period of decadence. Or I haven't read it in a long time, but it's a right wing writer, and Oswald Spengler is all about authority. He's all about tradition and authority, right? And that when the tradition and authoritarian structure, the traditions and authoritarian structures of civilizations fall apart, then civilizations die. And he talks about the fall of the Roman Empire. He talks about Greece. He talks about Egypt, and and he's basically arguing that European civilization that came out of medieval times, right? That European civilization is in decline. That's what Oswald Spengler is arguing. And that he sees populism, both left and right populism, in a negative light. Because he doesn't think, populism is you're building a mass movement of the people to make demands on their leaders. Oswald Spengler doesn't agree with that. Oswald Spengler, he said, no, the people should be obeying their leaders. They should be, the leaders should be demanding things of their people, and the people should be trying to serve them. It's a very, very kind of traditional authoritarian conservatism that in a way is a little bit anti-capitalist, because it basically argues that money and self-interest gets in the way of authority and tradition. And it's this kind of military, traditional, conservative. It's the really far right, right? This is the European far right. Julius Evola comes out of that strata of thinking. He takes traditionalism in a little bit of a different direction. But these are far right. This is the traditionalist right wing. That's what this is. This is the traditionalist conservatism. In the United States, conservatism has just basically become the worship of capitalism with religion, right? I mean, it's like, conservatives in the United States, they're more religious than most people, and they believe in free markets. Well, around the world, that's not what traditional means, or that's not what conservative means. Conservative means that you want authority. Conservative means you believe in nationalism. Conservative means you believe in traditional structures. And often, actual ideological conservatism does come into confrontation with capitalism, because capitalism is all about money. Money comes first, self-interest and all of that. And that a lot of what American conservatives believe flies in the face of what conservatives around the world that are like ideologically conservative, not libertarian, not free market, not just evangelical Christians, but like ideological conservatives believe. I've often pointed out that right-wing critiques of capitalism long predate left-wing critiques of capitalism, right? Left-wing critiques of capitalism don't come out until the French Revolution, until the emergence of socialism and such. But I mean, in Europe, the Catholic Church condemned money, right? There's a reason they called it filthy lucre, right? It was a sin to touch money for most people. They just touched it. That was considered to be a sin, right? And that the money, the Catholic Church taught that money was sterile, and that opening a business and trying to sell goods was not a moral, righteous way to live. That you should just work for your superiors and do the job you're assigned. And I mean the Roman Catholic Church and the various popes, they were condemning capitalism before it even really got going. Like just as the mercantile class was emerging, they viewed the mercantile class with high suspicion. Right-wing anti-capitalism, traditionalism, that's what Spengler is, right? Oswald Spengler, The Decline of the West. And this stuff is really popular with like alt-right kind of people. The Richard Spencer crowd and all of that. A lot of them, I think that they were, we've always had neo-Nazis in the United States. Well, we haven't always had them, but since the end of the Second World War, you had, there were McCarthyites, people that just hated communism, people that had anti-Semitic theories about communism. And you have George Lincoln Rockwell, this guy who was one of these John Birch Society right-wing guys who hated communism and had anti-Semitic, racist theories about communism, opposed the civil rights movement, who started putting on a Nazi uniform and going around calling himself a neo-Nazi. It was almost like performance art. It was like a sick racist performance art or something. But, I think that a lot of the people that like became like Richard Spencer, people like that, they were a little more, they kind of realized that the kind of people that put on Nazi costumes or Ku Klux Klan robes and, get beaten up by Antifa, that those kind of people are not, they're not going to do very much. And so among a lot of these alt-right types, there was an interest in digging into some of the more intellectual, I put that in quotes, intellectual strands of far-right thinking. And Julius Evola became very popular, and you'll remember that Steve Bannon quoted Julius Evola in a speech, and the New York Times exposed that. Oh, well, Julius Evola is, he was an Italian thinker and a traditionalist, who was tied in with the fascist government of Italy, but had this weird traditionalist right wing critique of Italian fascism, right? And Spangler and Evola, and I think there's a guy named, was it Ernst Juncker, and some of these far right people in Europe that are a little bit, they bring a lot more to the table in terms of ideas than some of these, than your typical neo-Nazi. I mean, George Lincoln Rockwell, I hate Jews. Jews are all communists. It's just this bigotry. It's just ethnic bigotry and anti-communism and kind of a military fetish. That's your standard right-wing stuff. And I think that, there's a lot of political confusion in the United States, a huge amount of political confusion now. And the left has become the synthetic left. And the synthetic left is something that a lot of young people who should become socialists and communists, they see the synthetic left and they think, well, I'm not doing that. I'm going the other way. And so alt-right kind of emerged. And that was an attempt to try and find some right-wing ideas. But what made alt-right different than a lot of the Ku Klux Klan, neo-Nazi kind of stuff that we've seen in the United States for decades is that it was a little bit more ideological. And they were looking to the European far right. They were looking to Oswald Spangler. They were looking to Evola. They were looking to people like that. And it's over, by the way. I mean, alt-right, from what I understand, it's over. I mean, it's done. Some of them are traditionalist Catholics now. I know it's a big thing. E. Michael Jones, who I actually met in Iran, which is kind of ironic because, I mean, we're politically miles apart. I mean, he's a traditionalist Catholic and I'm an anti-imperialist Marxist, but we met in Iran and we were often in restaurants and in buses together, which is really ironic because it's not somebody, I'm sure he would not want to spend time with me if he had the choice. And I certainly wouldn't want to spend time with him if I had the choice. But, we ended up, sitting next to each other a lot. E. Michael Jones and, traditionalist Catholics, and they're different, right? They don't view things in racial terms, and they with them, it's all about religion. There's a lot of anti-Semitism there, but it's framed up in religious terms. And I think I would argue that some of these traditionalist Catholics actually draw a lot from Freudian psychoanalysis. They hate Freud, but I think they draw a lot from his ideas. If you listen to traditionalist Catholics talk, a lot of what they say is very Freudian. I mean, for example, what they think about homosexuality. You listen to these traditional Catholics, that's Freud. That is Freudian. That's the Freudian analysis of homosexuality, right? The modern understanding among most psychologists is that, some people are just gay, right? Some people are just attracted to people of the same sex. But this idea that, well, if a man is gay, it's because he didn't have a good relationship with his father rejected him or was cold to him, so he's longing for that fatherly relationship, and if a woman's gay, it's because her mother rejected her. And, that's the traditionalist Catholics talk that way. Well, I'm sorry, the Pope didn't think of that, right? That's not Catholic teaching, right? That's very much Freudian teaching. That's Freudian. So it's a little bit weird. The traditionalist Catholics and a lot of their analysis where they make everything, everything's about people's relationship with their families. And it's like reverse Freudianism. You listen to a lot of them talk, right? It's they argue that abortion causes this guilt, and you listen to some of the stuff that these traditionalist Catholics say, it's extremely Freudian. It's extremely Freudian. It's Sigmund Freud just turned on its head to serve the opposite. Sigmund Freud he was an atheist, he was all about lifting traditional restraints. A lot of these traditional Catholics are very, very Freudian. It's just, they use a Freudian personal psychosexual family analysis to argue you should be a conservative. So there's that, right? There's that. I think, I don't know, there's a lot of different far right, ideas floating around out there, but I think alt-right, what you call alt-right. I mean, the New York Times just did a story on Richard Spencer. He's broke. He's being sued. No one talks to him anymore. I think alt-right is, that's kind of a footnote, right? Alt-right is just kind of a footnote. Yeah, and that's, I mean, good night alt-right, as they say. I mean, it was awful. I mean, it was awful. The hate, the memes, the bullying, the trying to revive the Confederacy. I mean, white people from the South especially should hate the Confederacy, right? And I told a group of alt-right people that when I debated Augustus Sol Invictus, I said, if you're a white person from the South, you should really hate the Confederacy, because there's a reason your incomes are significantly lower than people throughout the country. There's a reason you have weak labor unions in the South, and the labor movement is so weak. And they have the right to work laws that basically you can't have a closed shop contract in the South. I mean, if you're a white person, you should really hate the Confederacy, but that was alt-right. They were all about, oh, we love, white supremacists. We love the Confederate monuments. Why in the world would you defend the Confederacy? The Confederacy was trying to stop the industrialization of the United States. They're trying to keep slavery, the most brutal, horrendous system, intact, at the same time that they're then trying to keep the USA from raising its living standards and industrializing. They're trying to keep a semi-feudal plantation system intact. Also, British bankers can get cotton, right? Can get cheap cotton to set up their empire. I mean, there's nothing. I mean, if you love the United States, I mean, from a purely U.S. patriotic, I mean, the Confederacy was an abomination. I mean, it was a genocidal slavery regime that held back economic development for the benefit of a foreign power. They were working for the British Empire, for goodness sakes. So if you claim, as these alt-right people do, I love white people, I love white people, I love Southern white people, the Southern white people are good. Why in the world would you support the Confederacy, right? Put the brutal. I guess they're racist, so they don't care about black people. They don't care about all the black people the Confederacy killed, which is in the millions. They don't care about that. But like, even if you just if you do what they claim to do and claim that, oh, I love Southern white people, well, then why would you support the Confederacy that killed millions of Southern white people, that kept the South in underdevelopment, that kept Southern white people in poverty, that then sent and forcibly conscripted Southern white people to go and die to keep this plantation system intact? I mean, if these people claim they love Southern white people, why the hell would they defend the Confederacy? The Confederacy was an abomination, right? I mean, it's one of the most disgusting things. When I see the Confederate flag, it's like, I'm sorry, to look at a historical record. I mean, the Confederacy was awful. I mean, there's nothing good about the Confederacy. Nothing good about it. I mean, nothing. Nothing. I mean, there's nothing. There's not a single thing I can think of that was good about the Confederacy. Nothing. The Confederacy was an abomination. It was horrible. It was bad for the slaves who were being worked to death and tortured. It was bad for the workers of the South who were competing with people who worked for free, so they got low wages. It was bad for the United States because it kept a whole region of the country underdeveloped and not industrialized. It was bad for the global economy because it subsidized, with cheap cotton, the creation of the global free trade British Empire system. I mean, my God, and that's what the alt-right, ultimately, that's the hill they chose to die on, right? That's Richard Spencer and all of them. That's what they decided to do. They decided to die on the hill of defending the fucking Confederacy. I mean, can you think of a worse hill to die on than that? You want people to know what your movement stands for. They stand for Robert E. Lee. They stand for, good night. The alt-right was, I think, unfortunately, there are a lot of young working class people that were attracted to it on the internet, not in real life. Of all the hills to die on, you're going to die on the hill of the Confederacy. And that's what happened, right? I mean, Charlottesville was very much the last stand of the alt-right. It was the last stand of the alt-right. They did Charlottesville, and that was the end of the alt-right. They did Charlottesville. It's like the last thing they ever did, and then they collapsed as a political movement. And that's what they want. I mean, my God, you know. Of all the hills to die on, of all the things they chose to have a huge mobilization to defend a Confederate monument. And then they killed somebody, right? This guy drove his car and killed Heather Heyer, who was a counter-protester. And, a helicopter crashed, and yeah. Yeah. There you go. There you go. I mean, I mean, I don't know. The alt right is not a movement that I would, think anything of. I don't know how we got onto that, but it's just, we can do better than that, right? Working people of the United States, black, white, you know, men, women, we can do better than that, right? We really can do better than that. We need Marxism. And the fact that so many people across the United States were reading the writings of Oswald Spengler and Julius Evola, that shows they could read William Z. Foster, they could read Gus Hall, they could read Marx, they could read Lenin, right? They could. They could understand these ideas. So it's our job to get out of the movement and get to the masses and get these people that were scooped up into the alt right and led off a hill. Basically, they were marched off of a cliff basically by the alt right. Get these people to understand that racism hurts all working people and that we need a government of action to fight for working families. Black and white unite and fight. So there you go. All right. There you go. Yeah. All right. Eco-fascism. What is eco-fascism? Well, some sections of the white supremacist movement that very much believe in environmentalism. And that promote the idea. They promote Malthusianism, basically. That there's too many people in the world. Reduce the population. That and that in order to bring the world back into harmony with Mother Nature, we need to and it fits in a lot of environmentalist ideology, right? I'm not talking about environmentalism in general, right? Obviously air pollution is bad, obviously climate change is a bad thing, but a lot of the ideology of these kind of earth first types, these anarcho-primitivists, is actually very fascist ideology, right? I mean, they argue that everything has its place, there's the natural way of doing things, and so I mean a lot of these eco-fascists, yeah, I mean, they're being somewhat consistent, right? I mean, they want to reduce the population because there's too many people in the world, and that's the problem. They want to bring us back into balance with Mother Nature. The world is natural. They're consistent. I'll give them that, right? Left environmentalism is very confused sometimes, very, very confused, right? I mean, the whole point of Marxism is to raise living standards, right? You want to operate with the environment in a sustainable, rational way with a planned economy, but the idea that growth is bad. You can't be a leftist and think growth is bad. You can't be a leftist and oppose economic development. So there you go. They're consistent. I'll give them that. Um, all right. Corporations subsidized by the government. Yeah, Walmart, Amazon. Yeah, the state cooperates with them and subsidizes them. But at the end of the day, they're in charge. In the United States, the corporations control the government. And in socialism, the government controls the corporations. And it's a government based in communities, with a popular mass movement. All right. All right. The Communist Party of India, Marxist. What's their relationship with Modi? They hate Modi. Modi hates them. They hate Modi. I mean, they're very anti-Modi. Modi is very opposed to them. They have influence in Kerala, and other parts of the country. They lead labor unions. U.S. relations, Peru, Castillo, right? They lead labor unions. And there's not just the Communist Party of India Marxist. There's also the Socialist Unity Center of India Communist, which is a very important group started by Shibdis Ghosh. And then there's also the Communist Party of India, right? The Communist Party, and you also have the Naxalites, the Naxalite rebels, which are ultra left, and yeah. So I've done whole videos about the political situation in India, the farmers' uprisings and stuff. Communism is a very, very big influence in India. There's millions of communists in India. There's mass organizations, trade unions, community groups, and again, out of the movement to the masses. These people are serious, right? Communists in India, they matter. They're very important, big players in politics. Here in the United States, not so much. And we've gotta learn from the communists around the world who have whole provinces they control and have mass organizations of millions of people they lead. Um, you know, so there you go. All right, a popular front of all leftist parties. Is it possible in the United States? Do you think the answer lies in between? I don't know what that means, Robert Michaels, never heard of it. I don't know what that means. Again, I have long opposed left unity because unifying the left in the United States would mean bringing together a group of forces that have been isolated from the broad masses of people. So you would have to accommodate all the things that keep them isolated. So instead of unifying the left and bringing together all the tiny irrelevant communist parties, I would like to make communism unite with the broad masses of people and get the broad masses of people to understand Marxism. That's what I would like to see. So there you go. All right. The Green Party, they talk about institutions and power struggles within the Green Party. I've heard such things, and that there's rivalries and there's people that are critical. I interviewed Howie Hawkins about his presidential campaign, and then some people told me about the other candidate and how they felt like he was kind of rigged against him. And I've heard a lot of internal Green Party stuff before. Inflation in the United States and the printing of U.S. dollars, that's reality. Prices are going up. I'm seeing it myself. I mean, we're squeezing people. I mean, it's unbelievable. And this is New York City. I mean, the rent was dropping for a while in the pandemic. I mean, how can the rent still be what it is in New York? Good night. I mean, it's just working people. How are they going to live in this country? I mean, they're squeezing us tighter and tighter. Wages down, jobs down, prices going up, food is going up, rent is going. I mean, it's like, how are they expect people to live? I mean, they're just going to squeeze people. I mean, I'm watching this with my own eyes. I mean, I've got a good job. I do reporting. But how are people going to live? I mean, I look at this every day. I'm like, oh my goodness. I mean, I'm working with the John Brown volunteers, making sure they've got what they need to keep doing their operation. And I'm looking at this and I'm like, how can this be happening? This is abominable. I mean, I'm watching this with my own eyes. I'm like, this isn't, I mean, Biden says this is just a correction, right? It's just a correction. Wow. Okay. Well, I hope this correction better end soon, or else you're going to have a real explosion on your hands. I'll tell you that much. The China fentanyl narrative. Well, there's a lot of pharmaceutical products that are created in China. Fentanyl is synthetic heroin. Okay, heroin comes from opium poppies. But there's fentanyl, which is a drug that gives the same effect as heroin, but it's synthetically created. And a lot of the what do you call it? The ingredients that are needed to make fentanyl are made in factories in China. So based on that, people try to blame the Chinese government for the fentanyl. Fentanyl is much more dangerous than heroin. It's synthetic heroin. It's very dangerous. The thing is that those ingredients, they're made in factories in China, not simply for fentanyl. They're made for all kinds of pharmaceutical things. And the actual fentanyl, the overwhelming majority of it is made in the United States. People get these materials, some of which are made in China, that's true, but they get them and they make them in the United States, right? And that's what's missing, right? Is that, yes, fentanyl is dangerous, and yes, a lot of the ingredients, the pharmaceutical ingredients that are used to create fentanyl are made in China, but they find the fentanyl dealers, they make them in the United States. Overwhelmingly, they make them in the United States. So, if somebody's able to somehow manipulate, China is they don't allow drug dealing. That's one of the offenses in China they give the death penalty for very liberally. And I mean, heroin dealers, boom, you're dead. I mean, and they don't have a heroin problem in China. It's, a lot of developing countries have been really hit by that, but China, they have the heroin stuff. They crack down on that very effectively, and you know, I mean, somehow, right? Some of these materials, which are, the iron law of oligarchy, Robert Michaels, a German socialist in the 1900s, the idea that both of the political spectrum leads to the same outcome. Now, I mean, that sounds like horseshoe theory. But I've not heard of this particular individual that you just mentioned. That's interesting. I mean, that's anti-populism when it gets down to it, right? The left and the right are all the same. They're just the mob rule. They want an authoritarian regime, but we need freedom for the intellectuals, freedom for the elite from the mob, right? That's what neocons think, right? That's Leo Strauss. That's what they think, and they don't. In their minds, there's no difference between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union, because they're both societies where the mob, the inferior rabble, took power. Well, there's a big difference between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union, which is in Nazi Germany, mobs were mobilized for the purpose of engaging in mass destruction and terror to stabilize capitalism. Whereas in the Soviet Union, the mob, people were mobilized to build and construct and raise the country out of poverty and eradicate inequality and fight for social justice. There's a big difference, right? Yes, socialism and fascism both involve mass movements. Yes, socialism and fascism both involve inculcating the population with ideology. But the mass movements serve a different purpose, and the ideology is very, very different. Fascism is about mass destruction and terror. It is mass vandalism and destruction to try and stabilize capitalism. You know, socialism and Marxism are about mass mobilizations of construction to overcome the irrationality of capitalism and move toward a socialist society. Big difference, big difference. Very, very, very big difference. But to the elitists, right, to the oligarchs, it's all the same because it means the rabble, ruining their afternoon. It means that, we, the inferior sheep who are just supposed to be going bah, we're just supposed to be bagged, into our cell phones, bang into our phones, bang into our computers, bang into our TVs. We're the sheep. We're just supposed to be led around, right? We're not supposed to actually assert our agenda and say what we want. We're not supposed to, we're not supposed to take history into our own hands. We're just supposed to be, we're human cattle, right? We're just supposed to be, and we're just supposed to be their sheep. That's what we're supposed to be. And, socialism, I mean, as George Orwell, who is very much shares this mindset, right? Socialism is when the barnyard animals take control and they get rid of the farmer, and we can't have that. Look at that. That's a nightmare. That's just a nightmare. You can't have the barnyard animals, right? That's what they think of us. They see us people as barnyard animals. Well, we're not barnyard animals. We're human beings. And as much as they try to brainwash and control and manipulate us, at the end of the day, we are human beings. We do have the ability to assert our own needs and our own economic interests. And that's why they're scared of all mass movements. At the end of the day, but not all mass movements are the same. Not all. Fascism is a mass mobilization for violence, terror, and destruction, which they will turn to. The ruling class will turn to as their last resort. They'd prefer not to have it, but they would prefer that over communism, for sure. Predictions for Pedro Castillo and U.S. relations. Well, it depends what he does, right? At the end of the day, it just depends what Pedro Castillo does. If he actually implements dramatic reforms that are leading Peru towards socialism, then yeah, the U.S. relations, they'll go after him and such. But at the same time, if he's a bit of a disappointment, if he doesn't actually fulfill his agenda and his program, then the USA might point to him and say, oh, look, there's a socialist we can get along with. So it just depends. At the end of the day, actions speak louder than words, right? And that's what you have to remember. So on that note, folks, I'm going to end the stream here. A new upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression, but the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. And while the danger of a new world war still exists and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. And while the danger of a new world war still exists and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. Good night. Good night.